This is Ed White, All-Pro Offensive Lineman in the NFL, and you're listening to The Grueling Truth.
Welcome to the Grueling Truth's NFL Legend Show, brought to you by Gridiron Mo. Gridiron Mo is a new interactive football app where you get to call what you think the offense or defense should do during a live NFL game and see what all other fans have called also. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. As always, I'm your host for the Legend Show, Mike Goodpaster, and I want to welcome in my co-host, Matt Andruscavage.
Thanks very much, Mike. Always good to be here.
And like I said, I think this is definitely an NFL legend. For my money, if he's not the greatest offensive line coach that ever lived, he's one of the 2 or 3 best. Help me welcome to the show, Coach Jim McNally.
Okay, thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, let's start with your college
Thanks
career
for being
a little
here.
bit. Because the thing that amazes me about your college career is you walked on at the University of Buffalo as, a 5'8", 200-pound lineman. Can you tell us a little bit about what your college career was like?
Well, I'm local here from in my hometown is Kenmore, New York, which is right outside of Buffalo, and so I played football in high school here, and I had a lot of back then I don't think they had Division I, II, and III, whatever, but I had a lot of smaller schools that were interested in me. At that time, you didn't have to be 6'5", 310 pounds, but I was short. At my actual weight. If I was 5'8", I was 5'9", but now I think I'm 5'7" because I shrunk. So we could round it off to 5'8". Obviously, I was short. And the most I ever weighed when I played at Buffalo, University of Buffalo, was about 210 pounds. But anyway, coming out of high school, Buffalo was playing pretty good football, and so they wanted me to come as a walk-on. I actually wanted to go to Allegheny College, and they recruited me, and they brought me down there. But then Buffalo said, come on as a walk-on. They were playing a little bit better football. So I went to Buffalo, and ironically, Buddy Ryan was our coach. When I was on the freshman team, he was a varsity coach. He was a defensive coordinator. And I was a linebacker and an offensive center or guard. Well, I couldn't see as a linebacker. I didn't play in many of the freshman games back then. And what happened is, in the winter, we went in this room with Buddy Ryan. It was like a wrestling room. It was padded. The walls were padded. And I came back from spring or winter vacation. In my locker, there was helmet. There were shoulder pads. And I said, what are we going to do? And it was snowing out. So we went in this room. And we went one-on-one. We bloodied our nose. We did the things that you're not supposed to do nowadays. And by the time I was a sophomore, I lettered, and then I was a starter my junior and senior year. But if it wasn't for Buddy Ryan molding me into whatever he did, I would have never become – I was the littlest guy. I ended up earning a scholarship and playing. But, again, I think it was all Coach Ryan that put that motivation in me, and that was that one. But so back then, Buffalo, we played Boston College, Boston University, Villanova. Back then, this was in the 60s, and we played a pretty good Eastern schedule. We weren't like Syracuse or West Virginia at that time, but we did play a few big schools. And then since I played football there, and then I went into coaching. Buffalo, before we dropped football in 1970, we were playing North Carolina State, we were playing Virginia, we were playing Boston College. So it was we were not in a conference, and we were in New York State, and we dropped football in 1970. So that ended my career at Buffalo. I was there 10 years, actually.
Well, Coach McNally, being a smaller offensive lineman, do you think that helped you with your future coaching career? At that size, your technique sure had to be a lot better than others.
Well, actually, I was touted to be a little bit better on defense, believe it or not, because we played both ways back then. But back then we did a lot of scramble blocking, firing out as hard as you can, kind of on all fours. I don't know if that. The reason I became an offensive line coach, I became a graduate assistant at Buffalo after I got done playing, and I kind of hung around with the offensive line coach, and I wanted to be that coach because that coach seemed to be one of the guys that had the hardest job. He was a real motivator. It was kind of complicated, so I didn't understand all the schemes and the techniques so much. So that's one of the reasons that I actually wanted to go into that area, and I majored in pretty much in that area. And then I eventually got hired as the varsity line coach when one coach left, and so forth and so on. But I don't think it was so much my size. It was just I saw the intricacy of the position and the offensive line, and that's what I basically thought I wanted to do.
All right, now you coached there. Like I said, the program ended. You became the offensive line coach in 1971 at Marshall. You were a part of the first Marshall team after the tragic plane crash in 1970. You want to talk a little bit about your time at Marshall and what it was like during those trying times?
What happened was Buffalo dropped football in 1970, and so I was looking for a job, and my wife was pregnant. We're going to have our first baby. I don't think I've ever been out of Buffalo, to be honest with you, other than maybe a summer vacation somewhere. So all of a sudden, a good friend of mine named Mike Stock was a good friend of Jack Lengel, who was the head coach at the College of Worcester, who became the new head coach at Marshall. Well, one thing led to another, and I got an interview at Marshall with Coach Lengel, and they hired me. So my wife and I, we got in our car, and we drove down to Huntington, West Virginia. Now, I've never been out of New York State, I don't think, but for maybe a vacation. And so here I am in Huntington, West Virginia, what ended up being a great place. And, the Marshall thing was obviously a major disaster. There were 75 that were killed, in that major plane crash. And there were 3 coaches that were holdover that did not fly on the plane. They traveled recruiting in a car, and they recruited before. The game was in they played East Carolina, which was in Greenville, North Carolina. And after the game, it was November 14th, 1970. The plane flew back. It was a rainy evening. It hit the top of a mountain in Huntington, West Virginia, where Marshall is. The plane flopped over and crashed, and everybody was killed. So when I went there, the supporters, the boosters, they were so fired up about keeping football. And I met a lot of the parents of the kids that were killed. I met some of the wives of the coaches. And it was really an inspirational place. I mean, you can't even explain. You'd have to have gone through it. So actually our first year, we won 2 games, and we beat Xavier, who played football at that time, in the second game. And then about the 6th game we played Bowling Green, and they were leading the MAC, I think. I think their record was 6-1. Here came Don Nealon with this juggernaut. And I think the true story is, I think Coach Nealon called Coach Lengel, because we were one of the first teams to have AstroTurf at our stadium, Fairfield Stadium. And I think Coach Nealon asked the head coach of Marshall, Coach, what's the best kind of shoes? And I don't know if he told them that, but they ended up wearing regular football cleats. So here's Bowling Green losing their balance and falling on the ground. We beat them. And so anyway, but after 4 years at Marshall, the head coach resigned and went into business. I think he thought, he worked as hard as he could, and it was just a hard place at that time. And, it may have taken 10, 12 years after that before Marshall really put it all together. But we were the start of it. Our team was known as the Young Fund. Marshall is the Thundering Herd. We were the Young Thundering Herd. So that team, or those teams, those 4 or 5 years I was there, are a very close group. And, every year there's a lighting of a fountain in Huntington, or they start the fountain that shoots water out in memory of the disaster, et cetera. So it was quite an experience.
So how accurate was the movie to actually what happened that first year after the...
Well, I think the main what was pretty true was about Red Dawson. Now, Red Dawson was I think he was a defensive coach at that time, but he flew on the plane actually to the game, but he came back. He gave his seat to one of the older coaches. He says, "You go ahead and ride the plane. I'll drive your car back." So Red drove the car back, and with another coach or two that was still, that they were not killed in the crash. And what happened was Red was so hurt with the loss because he had recruited a bunch of kids. All the coaches, they all loved each other. So when the head coach came in, we wanted the remaining three coaches that were not on the plane to stay. Obviously, the head coach wanted him, the athletic director. And Red, it was very hard for him, and he said, okay, I'll do it. And after 2 years, the hurt was so much that he couldn't coach anymore, and he went into business. But the bottom line, there's a story in there about Red Dawson, which a pretty true story. The story in the middle with the girl whose boyfriend was on the plane and some of that stuff, really, it was Hollywood. That was Hollywood. I don't believe that the students stood out in front of the main building and chanted, "We are Marshall." I don't believe that the president of the school went to Kansas City and stood out in the rain. I mean, there's some shouts like that, but it's a good story, and but the bottom line is pretty true. But some of the stuff in the middle was just kind of spicing it up for Hollywood.
You eventually were named to the University of Buffalo's Hall of Fame. What did that mean to you, starting out as a walk-on?
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, I did play regular. I earned a letter. I was a starter. But I think when I got it, I was a coach for the Bengals. I think they may have given that to me not only because I played there and lettered, but because I had gone to I had been to other colleges and then been to the Bengals. We went to a Super Bowl. So I think that kind of combination, was the reason. I don't think I was that good of a player, but I think the combination of being a player and a coach, I think that was maybe the reason that they selected me for the Hall of Fame.
All right. Now you talked about the Bengals. You coached a couple more places. I think Boston College was one of them. You ended up. How did you get the job with the Bengals on Forrest Gregg's first staff in 1980?
Well, I was coaching at Wake Forest, and actually Wake Forest is a school of about 3,000, and we had an unbelievable team. I think our record was 8-4. We beat, listen to this, Wake Forest, we beat Virginia Tech, we beat North Carolina, we beat Georgia, we beat Auburn. So we went to the Tangerine Bowl, and Forrest Gregg had been fired by the Cleveland Browns. And Paul Brown, ironically, was also fired by Art Modell of the Cleveland Browns. So Forrest Gregg is fired by Art Modell, the owner of the Cleveland Browns. Before that, Paul Brown is fired by the owner of the Cleveland Browns. So Paul Brown starts the Cincinnati Bengals, and his coach was Homer Rice, the guy that invented that ran the Houston Veer at the University of Cincinnati. And then they hired him as the first head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. Well, Forrest Gregg, after he got fired at the Browns, went up to the Toronto Argonauts in Canada and coached for a couple of years. Well, I don't know what the timeline was, but after a few years, they had Paul Brown was really the first coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. But when Paul Brown retired, they promoted Bill Johnson to be the head coach, and then Bill Johnson was fired. Bottom line, Homer Rice was the head coach of the Bengals, maybe the third head coach. At the same time, Forrest Gregg's up in Toronto at the Argonauts. So they fire Homer Rice, and Paul Brown hires Forrest Gregg. I think he thinks that, well, listen, Art Modell fired both of us. We'll both get together and kick Cleveland's butt. So anyway, Forrest Gregg is now the new head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he was asking one of his coaches that coached him in Toronto if he knew of any good line coaches, because he was going to keep Mike McCormick, who was the line coach of the Bengals. He was going to keep him on as the line coach, but Mike McCormick was up to be the head coach of the Baltimore Colts. So, they didn't know if Mike McCormick was going to stay at the Bengals under Forrest Gregg or leave. So they brought me in because this fellow that worked for Forrest said, hey, there's a good young coach down at Wake Forest. So I'm up in Austin recruiting for Wake Forest. My wife says, Forrest Gregg called you. I said, what? Forrest Gregg? Somebody's got to be kidding me. So anyway, I returned the call, and it was Forrest Gregg with that country accent, and I said, yeah. I said, yes, this is Jim McNally. And he said, well, I'd like to bring you in for an interview. So I said, okay, great. Wow. So they called Wake Forest and got permission. And actually, I went up to the interview. I traveled from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the day of the Super Bowl that the Pittsburgh Steelers played the Rams, and the Steelers won the game. Well, I never saw the game because I was on an airplane. So I landed in Cincinnati, stayed in a hotel, interviewed with Forrest Gregg, and then a week or so later he said, Mike McCormick's going to be the head coach. We want you to be the line coach. So that's what happened in 1980. So that's how it happened. And the funny thing was, here I am, a young college coach, and the guys that he hired were Hank Bulla, who was a veteran defensive coach, Dick LeBeau, obviously we all know of, Lindy Infante, who was a great coach, Dick Modzelewski, who played in the NFL and coached in the NFL, George Sefcik, who was another coach. I think he coached the. So I'm kind of the only college guy that they brought on, and it was kind of real big for me. But I learned, and everything worked pretty good.
When Anthony Munoz joined the team, what were your impressions of him early on?
Well, funny thing was that I was a rookie coach, and he was a rookie player. And the first time I met Anthony, they brought him in for a physical. And this was, I believe, just before the draft. Forrest Gregg had went out to Southern Cal and worked him out. And in fact, if you asked Anthony, Forrest Gregg put him through a few drills, and Forrest Gregg rushed him. He said, "No, I'll be a defensive end. It's not full speed. And, I want to see what you're." So Forrest was rushing him, and Anthony punched him, hit him with his hand. He knocked Forrest right down. But anyway, when I came to the Bengals, here I am coming from Wake Forest, and we had a pretty good team actually. But here I'm going to be able to. I'm coaching the number one offensive lineman in college football from probably one of the best schools in college football, Southern Cal. So I go from Wake Forest to coaching Anthony Munoz from Southern Cal. And my God, of course, I looked at film on him, and he was just unbelievable. In fact, the first game he played, he got 28 pancakes, and they weren't all on the run. A lot of them were on the pass. He just put his guy on the ground. So it was just unbelievable. And 13 years later, I'm still coaching him, and 13 years later, he's still putting people on their back. So it was just an awesome experience, and obviously the greatest player I believe that ever played his position.
Yeah, I totally agree. What do you think made him so much better than everybody else? Work ethic, talent, a little bit of both?
Well, he had all that. He was so quick. He had, if you ever talked about quick twitch movements, sudden. He was athletic, strong. But he was so quick, and he had that quick twitch. He could roll his hips and very flexible. He was a pitcher on the baseball team. He was just 6'6", 300 pounds, and athletic and powerful. He just had everything. I can't put my finger on it because he was so good that there wasn't one thing. He had everything. He really did. Back then, we had a good weight program. We had Kim Wood was our strength coach, and they lifted weights and everything, but not like they do now. Now they've got trainers for this, trainers for that, the right things to eat, and this, that, and the other. And I think if he would have been in this day's training, although he trained hard by himself, but if he would have been in the ultra training methods they have now, he might still be playing. But he was terrific.
Later on, you coached under Sam Weish. You want to tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Sam?
Well, what happened after 4 years with Forrest, the Green Bay Packers, Forrest's contract, I think, was up. The Bengals wanted Forrest to stay, but he went back to the team where he, got his notoriety and Vince Lombardi and all that stuff. And actually, Forrest offered me a job to go to the Green Bay Packers, but I still had another year on my contract. I really didn't want to go anyway. I wanted to go with Forrest, but my kids were in school. I liked the Bengals. We had Anthony Munoz. So I wasn't able to leave, so I was happy I stayed anyway. So they brought Sam in because Sam was one of the first players that Paul Brown had, and Paul always liked Sam because he was a very smart student of the game, and that was the way they got Sam, because he was with the 49ers. He'd been on a Super Bowl team out there, so they brought Sam back, that he was a favorite son. And Sam was a very innovative guy. I mean, very intelligent offense. We ran that no-huddle offense. He was, like I say, a real smart guy, and knew a lot about the passing game, and really was great. I was with him for 8 years, and like I said, we were ahead of most of the people as far as strategy and all those kinds of things. And it was great. He was great, and very innovative guy, a lot of fun. Obviously a good public speaker, but we were a step ahead of other people for 5 or 6 years there when Sam came.
Now you talk about being ahead of people. You're also, I believe, weren't you guys the first NFL team to use the zone blocking scheme?
No, I mean, I think everybody at one time or another used some sort of zone. Zone blocking is when everybody just doesn't fire out straight ahead and block the guy over them. I mean, people would be slanting and looping, so you'd have to kind of, I mean, one of the first teams that might have done it might have been the University of Houston, who ran the Houston Veer, and I know they ran some zone blocking, but I know that
with Bill Yeoman. Yeah.
Bill Yeoman and those guys. But I mean, we ran some at Cincinnati, but where I really got a lot of information, I copied Howard Mudd's team at the Cleveland Browns, and I mean, we were doing some zone blocking with Forrest, but where I really got into it is we actually copied Cleveland Browns' favorite play, which was an off-tackle play, and Howard actually shared some ideas with me, even though we were playing each other. And that's where we really got into running like an inside play and an outside play. And we may have been the first team that combined the inside zone with an outside zone as a steady diet. Now, we ran a few other plays. We were maybe one of the few teams that ran those two plays as the major part of our offense. And that would have been probably in about 1985. Because the first year with Sam, we were maybe kind of normal, and then probably 85, 86, 87, 88, we were unbelievable. I mean, the holes were so big. I told our guys in our second playoff game, I said, watch this film, boys. You'll never see holes open up this big. But again, that was in the late 80s when we were really good at that stuff.
What was it like for you as a coach to step out on the field for your first Super Bowl 16, under Forrest Gregg and with the Bengals for that year?
Well, it was in Detroit, which was okay because we did everything indoors, but it was like it didn't feel like the other two Super Bowls that I went to because the other two, I went, one another with the Bengals and one with the Giants. So I was with the Giants, but we were down in Miami and in Tampa. So the weather was nice, and you were practicing on these beautiful fields and, outdoor stuff and all that stuff. But here we were, I mean, it was 0 degrees. It was snowing. It was like we hardly got to the game because there was a snowstorm up the bus. So the outside stuff wasn't quite as glamorous. But, when we got into the Silver Dome, it was like, I don't remember who sang the Star Spangled Banner, but somebody I'm sure important did. But, it was big. It was big time, and it was like, wow, here I am 2 years from college football, Wake Forest in the Super Bowl. But, it was terrific, fantastic, and, we lost the game. I mean, but we were like 1 inch from scoring a touchdown that might have had us win a game. They stopped us on the goal line, and Joe Montana, we played him twice in Super Bowls, and both of those times he led the final drive to beat the Bengals. So it was a very, very impressive thing for me to be involved with.
Yeah, and you bring up Joe Montana. I think Matt just asked the Super Bowl 16 question because he's a 49ers fan. He's always busting my balls about those two games because I'm a Bengals fan.
Well, he was fantastic. I mean, it was like and they were ahead of a lot of people at that time because they would run a lot of different plays. I mean, they were in like a regular backfield, and then they'd be in strong backs and maybe a little I formation, but they would run traps and counters and both guards pulling, and so they had quite an extensive offense with Bill Walsh's quick passing game. So, they not only had good players, but they had great coaching too.
Yeah, and people talk about Joe Montana, and you always hear this. Well, he had Jerry Rice, he had Roger Craig, he had all these guys, and the thing about him to me is this. If you look at Super Bowl 16, I don't think they had a rusher that ran for more than 500 yards. Was it Earl Cooper, Bill Ring, Ricky Patton, guys like that? And, I mean, there's no Jerry Rice there for the first 2 Super Bowls either. So, I mean, I still think that's why he's up there. If he's not the greatest quarterback of all time, I mean, the only guy I think compares to him is Tom Brady.
Well, yeah, he's terrific. And they did have a good running back, the guy from Nebraska.
Roger
Craig.
But Roger Craig wasn't there yet either.
Well, I know he may not have been, but I thought he was, but that's okay. But I know he was there certainly in the second game, but you're right. But, I mean, Montana was just terrific, and, he knew that offense, and they ran those quick passes, and, absolutely, and Bill Walsh. And so it was all of that stuff, Bill Walsh, Paul Brown, that all came from the same start, really, with Paul Brown, way back then.
I was wondering, as an offensive line coach, you're talking about Bill Walsh and some of the things that they were doing out there. What were your impressions of Bob Mckittrick, their great long-time offensive line coach?
He was a great one. I mean, nowadays we use the hands a little bit more. Bob was an expert at using the shoulder and the forearm. He's the one that pretty much was an expert on hitting the Crowther machine. He had a full progression of, you hit it with the back of your wrist, then you got in a crouch and you started hitting with your forearm, then you got your shoulder involved. And the whole thing about just teaching progressions of, 1 step, 2 steps, this, that, and the other. The guys loved him. He was a former Marine, I believe, and he would come out even on cold days, even though, San Francisco wasn't always cold, but on cold days, he'd come out in a T-shirt. He wouldn't put a coat on or anything, but he was a tough guy and a great coach. He really was.
Now, you talk a little bit about that, talk a little bit about offensive line play. When you're looking at an offensive lineman that's coming out of the draft, what's the first thing you look for?
Well, nowadays, pretty much what you look for is size. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to take a big, slow guy, but, I mean, the day of the 265, 75, 80, I mean, those guys, back 30 years ago, that was a big guy. I mean, now that doesn't mean an occasional guy that's 280 or 285 can't play, but right now everybody's so big, the defensive guys are so big that it's almost like a smaller man can't even play anymore. So, first of all, you don't have to be, the center doesn't have to be quite as tall. The guys that have to be taller, the tackles, because they need that range to push those defensive ends around the corner. So if a guy's 6'6", there's a good chance he's got long arms. And but anyway, after the size factor, I think it's the same stuff: athletic ability, the ability to bending at the knee. Don't bend at the waist. You don't want guys that are kind of stiff and mechanical. You don't want any in any position in football really. But flexibility, the ability to bend your knees. Quick feet. You don't have to run a fast 40-yard dash, but you've got to have some quick feet and the ability to bend and all that kind of stuff. So, good posture. Guys that have trouble in the offensive line are guys that are high cut. Guys with real long legs and short upper trunk. You like them with the short legs and the long torso, because your center of gravity is low to the ground. So they got to be able to sit down, bend, almost be able to touch your butt on the ground, without even being in a stance. Like I say, hip flexibility, whatever all that thing is pretty much what you're looking for. And the other thing, because the use of the hands is so prevalent now, particularly now with the trying to keep the head out and avoiding concussions. If a guy's got long arms, he is a plus. If a guy's got short arms, he's going to struggle because then he'll get too mired into the guy, and the defensive guy can kind of throw him. But if you got long arms, you can use your long arms on run and pass, and you have enough space to control the man.
What's your opinion of offensive line play today, and why do you think there's such a shortage of quality linemen and lines?
Well, I don't know if there's such a shortage. I think it's such a skill to play the position now, where back in the old days or the older days, more guys can play because the defenses weren't quite as good. Maybe they weren't quite as quick. The blitzing and the stunning weren't quite as much. So I don't think that's the issue as much as they've got to be so much better nowadays. They've got to be as good as the defensive linemen. I mean, actually, defensive linemen are very, very skilled, but the offensive linemen have got to be just as skilled in their position. So I just think that it's just like great defensive linemen. There's not as many great defensive linemen out there or offensive linemen. And I think back in the day, 30, 25 years ago, that more guys could play, so there's more of them. So that's not maybe a great answer, but that's what I think.
All right, so my big question now would be this. I'm sure you watch football today. I know I saw you still work as a consultant with the Bengals. What offensive linemen do you like to watch play today? What guys really stand out to you?
Well, I don't really watch one guy. When I'm watching, now I'll be impressed by a guy, but when I watch the schemes because I'm constantly trying to stay on top of the footwork, the schemes, the two guys working together, et cetera. So actually, the Bengals guys, Zeitler, the right guard, and they're all good players. I mean, Whitworth is a good player, but he's been playing for 11, 12 years, so he's a little older than some of the guys, but Bodine, he's very strong, very flexible. Zeitler, the same thing. But I guess other offensive lines, other than the Bengals, the Steelers are very well coached with Mike Munchak. The Kansas City Chiefs are very well coached. When I talk about very well coached, they're not old school, fire out as hard as you can and stick your head in and fall on the ground. There's more of an art now of, actually as crazy as it sounds, these defensive linemen are so good that instead of firing out 100 miles an hour where they just step aside, throw you aside, you can actually absorb them. If you can bend your knees, you absorb their force, and then you redirect their force by lifting them or throwing them or torquing them. So, in my opinion, offensive line play now is better when you aren't so overly aggressive to knock a guy off the ball. You kind of use the defensive guy's momentum against himself. So if you know anything about deflecting energy coming at you, or how to, here comes a car, two trains running into each other. Well, it would be a train wreck. But if you just hit that train on the side of it, you may knock it right off its track. So bottom line is I like watching the lines that are kind of into that type of stuff rather than the ones that just fire out 100 miles an hour and they may fall on their face and they're out of control. You know what I mean? And
yeah, so you think today is more about angles than just brute force?
Absolutely. It's not only angles, it's rooting your feet into the ground, it's lifting, it's torquing. A guy comes at you and you throw him. You know what I mean? I don't mean you just throw him up in the air, but I mean he gets into you, and it's all. You don't really want to hit a guy right down the center. You want to hit him on the shoulder. I guess what I'm saying, you don't avoid the guy, but if you're pass blocking, you might hit him right on one of his shoulders and tip his shoulder, then come back with your other hand at like a 1-2 punch, like a boxer actually. So I think the coaches that are now into a little bit more of martial arts in the offensive line may be a little bit ahead of the other guys.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys that really say the martial arts helps a lot. Now, I know if anybody wants to learn about offensive line play, I know you still hold the cool clinics, don't you?
Absolutely. It's the third weekend in June, and the guy that really, Bob Wiley runs it, but the guy that sends out all the literature is the guy right there in Cincinnati at the University of Cincinnati, John Widecan, Widecan. So if anybody's interested in that, he's the director of football operations at the University of Cincinnati, and he's been running it. Oh, my God. I think I even had him work for me when I started it. I started that thing about 1983 or 4. And but yeah, we get well over 300 coaches, and it's a Friday night and an all-day Saturday, the third weekend in May.
Now, is there a website anybody can look at the guys that are going to be there, stuff like that?
Yeah. I think they could if they just put in Cool Clinic, offensive line COOL Clinic. It's really the coaching organization of offensive line or something of that nature that we came up with, but COOL offensive line clinic, just Google it. You can Google anything nowadays, and all the times and the guys that are speaking and all that will come up.
Yeah, because I think I saw in there you've got 5 or 6 NFL line coaches are going to be there too, don't you?
That's what they do every year. They do offensive line coaches from the NFL on Saturday, and Friday night they bring in 3 or 4 college coaches to speak. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like actually a great time. Actually, I may attend this year. I may bring a couple offensive line coaches with me. So
beautiful.
I had a new program in the city this year, so and they had a really bad offensive line, and they wanted to fire out all the time. So we got to try to fix that. So I think what you say will help me with my assistants too. But
absolutely.
Matt, do you have any? What was that?
Go ahead. Oh, 2 coaches Paul Alexander is a great coach. I learned a lot from him. Other 2 coaches, there's a line coach. He's actually looking for a job now. His name is John Strollo. He was the offensive line coach at Ball State. He's so far ahead of all the other college coaches that I know of, even the ones at the great schools. And there's another guy that I learned from as a kid. I coached at the Giants as far as the use of the hands, martial arts. His name is Scott Peters. He's actually a world champion in jiu-jitsu. But, he's down in Arizona. He runs a company called Safe Football, which he goes all around the country and teaches guys how to block, et cetera, without sticking the head in relation to the concussion issue. But between Paul Alexander, John Strollo, and Scott Peters, I stay on top of the football, et cetera. So those are 3 of the best guys I know.
All right, Matt, you got any final words for the coach?
Well, I just first like to say thank you for coming on our show tonight, Coach. And secondly, I really enjoy I learned a lot tonight. I really enjoyed the intricacies on all the knowledge that you brought to the show tonight, and I learned a lot.
Well, the thing about me, I'm 72, but I'm learning every day. So I don't have many hobbies. I got 3 great kids, and my daughter's going to have another baby, and I got 2 daughters that actually live in Cincinnati. I've got a home there also, a condo. But I guess what I'm saying to you is that when I retired in 2007, because I was 65, and I said, geez, I'm still in great shape, but I don't want to do this from 6 in the morning until midnight, 3 or 4 days a week, and not be able to do other things. But I said my passion is still football, and I actually know more than I've ever known. Or what happens is most guys that when they retire may still have a little bit of a hobby of the profession that they did, but they get away from it, and after a couple of years, they're kind of lost, and they're not up. I am up to speed with it. I am an expert at my field, but I don't have to do it all the time, and I don't have to be real accountable. I'm a consultant with the Bengals. I help them when they need me. I'll put my 2 cents in, but I don't have to go through that high stress anxiety of when you lose, you feel terrible till about Thursday. That I didn't enjoy at the later part of my career because, I was on some real good winning teams, but I also had my share of losing. And pretty soon, I don't care. When it's all said and done, I don't think many coaches are well over 500. You're lucky if you're 500. So really, I love the game of football, but the losing part of it is not much fun, particularly when the whole world is looking at you in the newspaper and the radio and the TV. So I'm glad that I kind of got out of that limelight, whatever that is. But I do clinics, I do camps, and I'm on top of the football, so I'm glad I can do that stuff to keep me busy.
Well, and you talk about the
really got the best
being
of
the
both
worst
worlds.
part. You talk about the losing being the worst part, but like tonight, earlier, I interviewed Bruce Reimers, talked to a few other Bengal linemen that have played for you, and the best part about this, even more than going to the Super Bowl and the wins, has to be the way you know these guys feel about you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, we were winning too. I mean, through the most of it, I mean, it's a lot easier when you're winning. So with that group of guys, I mean, you know, in the mid-'90s now, we weren't doing so good. I mean, in the mid to late '80s, but then, you know, we got into the 92, 93, whatever, you know, and then the Bengals struggled for a few more years till Favre got them back on track. But so anyway, yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, you know, they pay you good money, and you're in the limelight, you're on the sideline, and everybody thinks it's a glorious job. But like I say, that it's just like when I came back to the Buffalo Bills, which is my hometown. I have 4 years here with the Bills, and I've got well over 100 friends here. I went to high school here, college, and my nickname is Mouse. And they said, Mouse, what's going on? What's wrong with you guys? Blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that constant, I don't want that anymore. I want to be under the radar. And so, because I probably still have a few years to live, and I don't want to go through that stress of having to win every day in my job, you know. I want to be under the radar.
Yeah, and I interviewed Coach Hannafin yesterday, who I think is up in that list of the greatest offensive line coaches, and I know he wanted to send you his best also.
Yeah, he's a great friend of mine. Some of the great other offensive line coaches, though, really, Howard Mudd is a great line coach. Alex Gibbs, obviously, was a great line coach. I mean, Alex Gibbs, he ran only 2 or 3 plays. He used some basic fundamental techniques. But, again, they had John Elway and a couple of guys. But he's one of the great guys that use that inside and outside zone. Howard Mudd was one of the guys that actually started something called the drop step, where you just don't fire straight out. You lose a little ground with the step. So, but, I mean, there was Hannafin, Howard Mudd, the guy named Bill Muir. You know, there was a number of guys, you know, Hudson Houck, that were all real good coaches. But I think, like I say, I think the game has changed now because of the, you know, don't stick the head in, don't get the concussions, you know, blah, blah, blah. So the use of the hands now is so important nowadays.
Yeah, I remember, heck, when I was playing Pee Wee football in the 70s, you know, we had to block with the old double wing up. Made it really hard to block somebody, too.
Absolutely. So, but anyway, but that's it.
Yep. So, I mean, it was absolutely an honor to have you on the show, Coach. Anytime you want to come back, you're more than welcome.
Okay. Well, you just call me and I'll be there. So, thanks again.
All
and
right.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot, Coach.
Thanks very much, Coach.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, make sure you can check us out on the Grueling Truth Facebook page. You can check us out on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, and about every other place that has podcasts. Let's see.
Right.
Tomorrow I will be interviewing Greg Bingham because Matt can't be here because he's got a stupid job. And next Monday night,
I got to get food on the table, right?
Next Monday night, we will have former Rams tight end Buford McGee, who Matt loves in Tecmo Bowl, which in a second you're going to tell everybody about your Tecmo Bowl tournament. It looks like I was messaging with Darren Nelson, former Minnesota Viking running back. Looks like he'll be on the show next Thursday night. So, Matt,
he's good back.
Tell us how the Super Tecmo tournament went in, was it Madison, Wisconsin?
Yep, Madison, Wisconsin. They've been holding the largest Tecmo Super Bowl tournament in the country for the last 12 years. It was a great time. There was about 268, 270 competitors. I was able to make it to the top 32. Much better than I played last year, but you know, regardless of where you end up, it's a great way to kind of relive your childhood. And a couple of the players that we've talked to, J.J. Burton, Dexter Carter, some of these guys really enjoyed the game, and it's fun to kind of relive that a little bit. But it was a good time. You know, who knows? Maybe Buford McGee likes it too.
You never know. You'll have to bring it up to Buford. Maybe Buford will come up and help you, coach you through. Maybe you can stop losing all the time when you go to those tournaments.
Well, I'm not losing as much as I did. I still got a winning record, but
well, you made it to the final 32. How many people were there?
270.
Well, that's not that bad. But it's not first.
That bad. No,
if you're second, you're
pretty
just the
good.
first loser. So that makes you like the 31st loser by Ricky Bobby Sanders on Talladega
Yeah, pretty
Night.
much. I was close. I was real close to getting to the top 16, but couldn't pull it out at the end.
It happens. Now you know what it's like to be a Bengals fan. You can get to the big show, but you just can't win when you get there. You didn't throw your controller and get a penalty, which cost you the game, did you?
No. Fortunately, I stopped doing that when I was about 9 or 10.
Okay.
No more throwing controllers.
Well, it's just a shot at, I don't know. I don't know what it's a shot at. That Pittsburgh Steelers playoff game still pisses me off. So.
Yeah, I kind of figured it had something to do with that wild card game.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me as much as Super Bowl 16 and 23 still to this day, though. So.
Well, it's
I'll
never
get over
fun to
that
lose a Super Bowl.
I'll get over that at some point. That'll be the point where you find out, oh, Mike's gone. Let's see. I'll get over it about then. Then you can say, hey, he's resting in peace. He's not thinking about the Super Bowl. But
that's the only way you ever get past a Super Bowl loss is when you're not breathing no more, I suppose.
So, any final words for all your Super Tecmo Bowl fans?
Well, if there are Super Tecmo Bowl fans out there,
well, you need a group of fans that come with you to cheer you on. I saw that there was a guy there that had to heckle.
Yeah, that's true. The one guy brings about 15 to 20 of his friends along. 3 of my friends showed up to support, and also went to go put another friend of mine, and I actually we were competing together. So when I was playing, I had 4 people cheering for me as opposed to the other guy who had like 20. But that's
so
unusual.
You got intimidated is what you're telling me.
No, I didn't get intimidated. I actually didn't. I had my last game. I had 5 hecklers. They were buddies of the guy that I was playing, and they were laying it on pretty thick. But it didn't really waver. It didn't bother me as much as I thought it might.
Yeah, you should just talk crap back.
It's not like I'm.
Watch those old Larry Bird, Michael Jordan
films. With my play.
Yeah, well, that never worked. Did you win that game?
No, that was the game. That was my last game. It was going well, and I almost had it, but I wasn't able to pull it out at the end. It made a bad throw at the end.
Yeah. That's life. That's just like when Steve.
But
Dills
it's fun. There's a. But there's a pretty big community out there. A lot of people still play the game.
But
who was that?
Steve Dills. Didn't he play for the Niners?
I don't think so.
I thought he was in the 70s. I don't know. That was probably before your time, though, because you're young still.
I know a lot of the 70s quarterbacks. Doesn't sound familiar, but.
We'll see.
So, yeah, it was
I know
a good
he played
time.
somewhere. I know he played at Stanford College, but. Well, once again, we're going to let everybody go now because probably people don't want to hear us ramble on about your Super Tecmo Bowl experiences. But go check out the
I wasn't going to bring it up.
Check out, I brought it up just because you lost. If you'd have won, though, you'd have started to show off with it. We could have been interviewing Elvis, even though he's dead. It would have been the hugest interview ever, and you'd have brought that up to start it. But maybe we'll have to do a live remote show. Maybe we'll have to do a live remote show from the Super Tecmo Bowl championships next year.
Yeah, maybe we should.
But don't forget, everybody, check out our sponsors, Gridiron Mo, www.gridironmo.com, Steelberg Box, and RealBengalsFans.com. So for Matt Andruscavage, this is Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.